Welcome, everybody, to Crossing the Firewall. I am Tom Holt. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State University. I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training. And I'm here with my two co-hosts, as always. I'll let you two introduce yourselves.
I'm Dr. Rachel McNeely. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at MSU, and I'm an associate with the center.
Hello, I'm Dr. Taylor Fisher. I am a postdoc here at MSU, and I too am an associate with the center.
So the purpose of the podcast is to get us talking about cybercrime issues, cybersecurity stuff. Our goal is always to try to help blend these different areas of work together, because you have people who are researchers like us, people who are practitioners, whether that's in cybersecurity or in law enforcement or policy. There's so many different areas that cyber touches on. Our goal is to try to make these issues a little more understandable, relatable, and try to get the average person to understand a little bit more about these problems. And today we have a great guest with us who I think is going to be instrumental in helping us understand this. I've known him for a really long time. He's a great guy. He is Dr. Tom Hyslip. He's an assistant professor of instruction in the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. And we'll talk to him in just a moment. The main thing that we always start with is just kind of a brief discussion of contemporary issues and problems. And unfortunately, in my mind, it's a problem that never stops, and it always evolves. It always takes some new form. And Rachel, you were just talking before we got started about a story that you read today in USA Today. Is that right?
Yeah, so USA Today has this two-part investigation that they've put out, essentially looking at something that we talk about a lot, which is private companies acting as victims' resources, because people don't know they can go to the police, or they know it goes really slowly. And essentially this company was using Google to promote their services. So when people were searching help for sextortion or things like that, this company was popping right up. And they would charge these people around $7,000, I think, for their first phase one approach. And lots of people have worked with this company and were satisfied with the services. They said it was either wait and file a formal police report and see if something happened, or pay the money and know for sure something was going to happen. Unsurprisingly, though, a lot of people who paid that money felt like it was what we call secondary victimization. It was just another hit that they were taking after being scammed. And one person who's quoted in the piece said that they were worse than the original extorters, essentially. Mm-hmm. So it's this landscape where, as we're trying to get police capabilities, perceptions of police better around cybercrime, the private sector is kind of taking advantage of this and leveraging it to get people to pay for private services. So I think we've said before, it's like Wild West right now as far as response to cybercrime on the individual side of things. What does a single person do after something like this happens, and how can we make sure they know where they can go? And one person is quoted as saying, if I knew there were free resources or the police could point me somewhere, I would have just done that. And they didn't know. And so I think this is a huge problem right now.
Absolutely. I think, just not knowing what you don't know is always such a struggle. And so in that moment when you're dealing with something that is urgent, is very serious, right? They're feeding off that same urgency that scammers do. It's, I need this to be done right now, and I don't really know what to do, so I'm waiting for instruction. And so it's only a matter of time until offenders take that pattern in and of or amongst themselves, right? And say, okay, we know that we're creating this environment of urgency and you need to act now. Can we take advantage of that? And then, like you said, if you don't know what those free resources are, you don't know where to find them, you just Google your way to it, and this is the first one that pops up. It's like, all right, well, I don't know who to trust, and that can be really difficult. And even from us, like, I can't tell you what the federal government is doing right now. I know some of the things that they're working on, but even someone inundated with it doesn't have a full picture of it.
So let's bring in our guest, because I think he probably has some opinions about this. Thanks for coming on, Tom. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how you got into dealing with cyber.
So back in the late 90s, I left the Army and joined the Secret Service as an agent in the Pittsburgh field office. And this was 1998, and it was kind of the Wild West of cybercrime, where the home internet broadband was just coming online, and there was a lot more people getting online, and no real security involved. And so the local agent in charge asked if anybody had any computer background, and I had some, and he said, well, would you be interested in doing cybercrime? Sure, sounds like fun. And, that was my first year on the job, and I did it for the next 23 years, and now I'm teaching it and really enjoyed it, and boy, has it changed.
Yeah.
So you've had a lot of different hats in terms of law enforcement. Can you talk a little bit about some of the different avenues you've been in?
Yeah. So I mentioned I started with the Secret Service, and got into the forensics and the intrusion investigations with them. Had a great time, and then it was time to go to protection full time, and I didn't want to give up the cybercrime investigation, so I jumped over to the EPA. Has a small criminal investigation division, and they were looking for someone to move to Research Triangle Park area in North Carolina to their National Computer Center and kind of start up their intrusion response investigations and do forensics for them. And so I went there and spent about 7 years there. And then an opportunity opened up at the Department of Defense with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, and I liked their mission a little more, a lot broader, cybercrime-wise, and went over there and ended up getting promoted and started one of their first cybercrime, offices for the East Coast here in the States, and I ran that for my last 12 years and had a great time there, a lot of fun.
How did you wind up getting into academics?
So, well, it's funny, with the Secret Service, back in the early 2000s, as they were ramping up and bringing more training, more cyber people, I was asked to go down and teach at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center to teach some of the cybercrime stuff for the new Secret Service agents going through cyber training, and I kind of enjoyed it and got the bug, and so over the course of my career, I taught whenever I could. I went and I got my master's degree and started teaching at the local community college. And then shortly thereafter, I think I met you when you were down at Charlotte, Tom.
Yeah.
And, we hit it off, and I started looking at retirement-wise what I wanted to do, and thought teaching would be a great, secondary career after law enforcement. And you recommended, well, if you're going to do that, you got to go get your PhD. So
Join the
off
fun.
I went, and to finish that up before I retired, and was fortunate enough to grab this position at South Florida, and been having a great time there ever since.
Are you interested in a career in cybersecurity? Are you currently in law enforcement and looking to learn more about technology and cybersecurity? If so, please consider joining us for our master's degree in cybercrime and digital investigation from Michigan State University. Experience a nationally ranked program taught by world-renowned researchers like my two co-hosts on this show and practitioners that can help you play a role in combating cybercrime and advancing justice for victims. This is designed to be completed in as little as 2 years and in a flexible online format that works with your schedule. Visit cj.msu.edu to learn more. We hope you can join us. It's funny. It's one of those things people assume you can teach just so long as you've had experience, but it seems like the academic world has changed so much that it's not really the case anymore. There's still an expectation of some kind of graduate education, some degree of teaching experience or something, so that way you come in and you're not just totally outside of the box and trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, and it really holds true in cyber areas, because there's so much. You got the theoretical side, but the practical side, and then when you're all the changes and you're bringing in the different data sets that you don't normally see in other academic areas, and how they're changing, and it's really a mixed bag of, like you talked about in the intro, how there's so much going on and so much changing that you really need to be a jack of all trades almost to be able to teach it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that barrier, as in needing a graduate degree of that level to teach, is hampering our ability to give this practical experience in a teaching form to young people and college students?
I do to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're going to need, especially, like at Michigan State, USF, an R1 institution, you need the people with the PhD to be able to do the research. But I've seen it changing where myself, I'm on an instruction, so I'm not tenure track, right? I'm on an instruction track. And we have quite a few instructors now in our program and other programs there that have a master's degree with experience in the field, and it allows them to get in. Again, you're not on a tenure track, but I think a lot of these people, like myself, coming from another career, you might not be searching for that tenure track, and so it's kind of opened the door to them. And now I think you get kind of the best of the both worlds. You have, yourselves on the tenure track with the PhD, doing the research, also doing the practical stuff. But then you bring the people in that really don't have the research background, but they got the practical experience background, and you combine them together, and you get the best of both worlds within the programs you're teaching.
So as a USF grad and having gone through that digital forensics certificate that you've kind of talked about the practical stuff, I'd like to ask you from your perspective, how have you seen those practical skills play a role in criminology? Because, that program specifically is housed within a criminology degree, and so we really focus on behavior, but we know those practical skills are necessary. And so how have you seen kind of the process of getting that practical exercise to behavioral scientists as students?
Yeah, it's almost they have to kind of want to do it, right? You can't force them, and some people just aren't interested in it, and that's fine, and they're going to do their thing. But you got to find people who want to do both and encourage it. And some people are very intimidated by it if they don't have that background. But if you make it welcoming and work with them to get them through it, maybe introduce them with some, maybe not 4-credit courses, some professional education or certificate type training, get them, give them the bug, and they're like, I can do this, and then they come in, to the academic programs and really learn it, and then they can really incorporate it into their coursework if they're teaching, and didn't have that practical background. I think that's one way. And then, as we talked about a minute ago, trying to get people that already have that background. And we used to talk a lot about in law enforcement, is it easier to teach a cop to do cyber, or is it easier to take a cyber person and teach them to be a cop, right? Because it's competing interests and they're different. And there's no right answer, and it works good both ways. And it really depends on what you're expecting them to do once they're in that position in law enforcement, really.
And I think that's something, as we've been designing and talking through our trainings here in our center, is figuring out to what degree do we need, because our training, first one was for line officers. So what level do we need them to be at, right? And we spoke with some of the analysts at Michigan State Police, and basically they told us, just make sure they're putting phones on airplane mode, right? They don't need to be doing triage. They don't need to be doing field digital forensics. It's just the preemptive steps. So when it gets to the analysts, things are still in good shape. But yeah, you don't necessarily need every cop to be a digital forensic analyst. There are civilian roles for that and people who are trained more for that. But you got to have some kind of cohesion in those two parts, right?
Yeah, and those first responders really it's more of an awareness level and knowing a few key skills, so they don't either damage the evidence, tamper with the evidence, and they get it to a trained professional who can extract the data and do the analysis of it, as well as it's not just the data on like a phone or a computer, right? It's knowing what potential pieces of evidence might be there. I always, in one of my classes I talk about, if you say a domestic dispute and you get a call as a 911 as a police officer, uniformed police officer, you're not thinking about digital evidence and cybercrime, but it's there, and there's opportunity if you're taught that in your academy or in a professional education course if you just have that in the back of your mind, because if the victim or the suspect or witness, if they have phones, right, it's showing them there, you're showing connections, you can, and so if just to grab those or think about it or ask the question, well, did your ex-husband, if he's a suspect, does he have a phone? What's the number? How does he use it? Has he been to your house before? And then they can go grab that. They know to report that to the detectives who are going to do the investigation to obtain that evidence. And it's just knowing to ask those questions, let alone grabbing the actual devices.
Well, and I think it's interesting, too, because so many of those questions are really just adapted old school questions, right? It's instead of asking for what's your phone number, I'm going to ask what's your email address. Instead of asking for, what is the name of your brand, I'm going to ask for your gamer tag. So there's similar questions being asked, but just adapting them a little bit to know what that landscape looks like.
Yeah, and in training the officers on that is really where I think the problem lies now, in that there's courses available, but there's not a lot of them, and I don't know how much of this is incorporated into basic law enforcement academies, right? They're learning how to shoot, put on handcuffs, drive a car, and they only have, say, 10 weeks to do it. a lot of them might not have incorporated, again, it doesn't have to be 2 weeks of training. It could be a 2-hour block of just awareness of digital evidence and digital, we call it the digital footprint of potential suspects and victims, just to be aware of it. And then when you get on the scene, the bell goes off in your head. Oh, wait a minute, I need to ask this question. And the more they learn and they start incorporating it, it helps everybody.
So what kind of trainings do you give when you're working with law enforcement? What's your primary focus?
So we have 2 right now that we run at USF. The first one is actually that it's an 8-hour awareness course. It's called Digital Evidence Recognition, and it really goes over those basic things we just talked about. In that, basically, almost every crime, there's potentially digital evidence there, and just being aware of it. You don't need to know how to collect it. You don't need to know how to image a phone. But knowing it's there and to ask those questions, for example, a car, what kind of car does you drive? Well, that car might have an entertainment system. Now there's vehicle forensics, right? You're not going to do the vehicle forensics, but just asking that question so that when you report it up and if it goes into an investigation, the person knows to, oh, that car has an entertainment system that has data on it. Let's go get a warrant for it. And then the other things we talked about, right? Whether it's asking for social media accounts, whether it's asking, for their email, all that information is just an awareness course to make general police officers aware of it, and then they can ask those questions, and then somebody else can potentially, in a further investigation, go obtain that evidence. So that's the first one. And the second one, Tom, is actually a newer one that we had started with you years ago, with that undercover cybercrime investigation. And so we've updated that a little bit, and we offer that now, and it's a 40-hour course, and it's all online. And really, again, it's not only how to work undercover, but it helps officers with protecting their own personal identification online, and you don't have to be undercover. It can be open source intelligence, because a lot of it all kind of is related on how to go find information online, how to protect your identity online, whether it's undercover or in real person, and then knowing that criminals could use these same skill sets, right? Whether it's using VPNs, using Tor, to mask their digital footprint, in how to overcome that, and how to find the real information you're looking for. So those are the 2 we're offering now. And then I've been working with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency on some really good cybersecurity training. That's more for the first responders, cyber guys, working in a municipality, working in MSU, and there's a potential incident. How do you collect that data quickly and analyze it and triage it, and getting cyber threat intelligence integrated into the responses? And so that's been a lot of fun, and it's free. It's really good. If anybody's interested in that type of training, go to CISA's website and type in incident response training. Anybody can take it. And so if you just want to get a little experience in it, it's great training.
That's great.
Yeah, what in your experience, what's it like going to a local agency and doing an online undercover training? How do the officers take it? Is it stuff that they're already familiar with, or is it a lot of opening new doors for them? Yeah,
most of it's opening new doors. I would say I did it in person up here. I put it on for the local Crime Stoppers, and we had about 100 people here. And our friend Gary came up and taught it with me. And I would say the vast majority of them hadn't been exposed to much of this, and it really opened their eyes because, again, you could be dealing with it's not obviously drugs are online and with the dark web and social media and selling stuff on apps and stuff like that. But take a theft ring, right? They're going around stealing bicycles, for lack of a better term, and then they're throwing them on Facebook or Craigslist or whatever. They're selling them, stuff like that. Well, you can use this. I mean, we talk about that as an example. Like, wow, I didn't even think of that. And they learn how to go and engage with them, identify them, get that information to find this ring of people, a theft ring, again, whatever it may be. Just a simple example, but it's been really good. And actually, the first year when we had the grant to do that training down in Florida, oh gosh, I forgot the name of the county, and it was a local county sheriff's department. They came through the training. They liked it so much. I gave them copies of everything, and they've integrated it into their new detectives training, both the courses. So they get that as part of their new detective academy training, just because they weren't getting it otherwise. So it's been real receptive. I think they're learning a lot in those.
That's fantastic. From a training perspective, I wonder, given universities offer training, you have training academies, but then you have the whole industry of training, whether it's SANS or any other company that offers certs and all of that. How do law enforcement agencies figure out who to go to? How should you pick what your trainer is going to be? I know that's a complicated question, but it's one of those things where we're running into that too, is agencies have so many options. How do we know which one is the one to go with?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, first, the agency's got to think about their mission, right? If you're federal, your FBI, your Secret Service, you're doing ransomware and large intrusion investigations, that the different like SANS certifications and stuff probably are good for you, or as well as say that CISA training I mentioned, where you're learning about endpoints and collecting data off of the different devices on networks and putting all that together with logs, right? If you're a local PD, and you have two people that are going to do cyber for you, whatever that may be, then you got to look at, okay, well, we need some basic forensics training and maybe a little bit of the social media and how people interact on it and how to get that evidence off of those devices, because that's really what they're dealing with. And so it starts with the mission, and then from that mission, they can really tailor their focus on the training they need. And, there are some resources out there for the local PDs in those incidents, whether it's the National White Collar Crime Center. Obviously, the Secret Service has the center down in Hoover, Alabama, that they'll send task force officers to. But then, if you're a bigger agency and you're getting more involved, where you got to say a drug task force, violent crime task force, and you're really starting to get into, you need to get a line, identify people and stuff like that, then you're kind of in that gray area where some of that advanced training might help, or it's kind of OJT as well, because there is not a lot of focused law enforcement training in those areas. It's either commercial cybersecurity type training or digital forensics. There's not a lot of the cybercrime specific for investigators. I think that's where we can fill that gap in academia, because we have enough people now with the background, and we can kind of tailor professional education training for law enforcement in cybercrime, because outside of Federal Law Enforcement Training Center or the FBI Academy, there's not a lot of places doing that. And so I think we can fill that gap, especially for the state and locals.
Mm-hmm. So one question that keeps popping up in my mind, because we mentioned a couple times, like there's a difference between the typical call for service where a phone is involved versus a network intrusion case, right? These are two very different investigations, processes, and scale, presumably. So since you've had that firsthand experience, can you talk us through what does like kind of that early part of an investigation look like when you're dealing with something like a hacker, something bigger than just I need some phone digital forensics work? Like, how do you coordinate that? How do you work with the different pieces involved?
Yeah, so it usually starts with, you get a victim calls you, right? So say, some Fortune 500 company gets hit with ransomware, or there's an intrusion and they're getting blackmailed, whatever the case may be. You go to that company and you work with their cybersecurity people in the company, and you work with them to gather the evidence they have. And then based on that evidence, you go and you work with your law enforcement partners as well as like the Internet Crime Complaint Center, and you're looking at the indicators of compromise, right? The IP addresses, the email addresses, stuff that could be unique to that group, because nowadays this is big business. These are organized crime groups doing this stuff, and so then you're looking at, okay, are there other victims with these same techniques and procedures that were used in this attack? And then you try to because you can't work the one off continuously. You don't have enough resources. You got to try to tie these together. And the FBI's done a good job in that. Once they tie it together, they say, okay, well, it looks like this organized crime group has hit at least these 3 or 4 big entities. They'll assign it to a specific office, and then that office will focus on that group, not on individual intrusions, but on that group. And then so say it's being worked out of Tampa, they're working on, the Lazar group. In Buffalo, gets something in, hey, this company just got hit, and the IP addresses, the IOCs are coming back to this Lazar group. They go and interview them, bundle it all up, and they send it to Tampa, and Tampa incorporates it into their big investigation, instead of having 20 different offices working on the same group doing the investigation. So, but it's really a partnership with those organizations, because you can't just go in and, run ransack over their network because they're still in production. They're still running a business, worth billions of dollars. You got to tread lightly and make sure you're working with them to get the information you need. And then from that point, once you get that initial information based on that, you turn to the traditional investigation techniques. You're getting subpoenas, you're getting search warrants, you're working with the international partners because a lot of these people are located overseas. You're going through the MLAT treaties to send stuff over to these foreign countries and saying, hey, we're working this investigation. We know that these people came from your country. Here's the information we have. And then you end up working with them, and it becomes a big international investigation. I can't think of one where, once it goes overseas, you're engaged with these international partners in all your investigations.
And just for the listeners who don't know, what's an MLAT? What does that mean?
I'm sorry, Tom. Yeah. So Mutual Law Enforcement Assistance Treaty. And so it's a treaty that maybe 60, 70 countries signed. And so it allows the different Department of Justices in these different countries to under the treaty to ask for assistance. So you say, hey, we have an investigation. We've traced this back to your, something coming out of your country. Here's what we know. We're asking for your assistance. And when they get it under that treaty, they will open a parallel investigation and then work with you on it. And then it's a way to pass evidence back and forth. Otherwise, it's very hard to engage with these, you can't just cold call a police agency in a foreign country and be like, hey, I need some help. This is Tom. And so that's one way. And then the other one you'll hear about is the Budapest Convention, which a lot of countries signed that are not parties to the MLAT. So it's another way to work with these foreign countries in a way to, legally work together and get the information, especially the evidence back and forth, because if it's not a crime in that country, they're going to hesitate to work with you. But if they sign an MLAT, they'll work with you. And so, again, it's a way to work internationally. And as we all know, especially these large cybercrime investigations are all international now.
Mm-hmm. I think something that comes up a lot when we talk about more local law enforcement responses is this threat of offenders that aren't in their jurisdiction, right? So is the MLAT, does that provide avenues for even local and state level agencies to pursue investigations, or is that a federal level avenue?
Yeah, so the MLAT's federal. It goes through the Office of International Affairs at DOJ. But what happens a lot is, if it's a state or local case and it turns out to be a big intrusion case, or let's say, God forbid, someone dies, sextortion case, right? Someone dies and they're able. So the state and locals respond. They start working it. They'll get the feds involved because they realize, it's a sextortion case, and the initial information they get from subpoenas and stuff come back to, a foreign country. At that point, they'll work together, and the feds will get that information overseas through the MLAT. And then once they get it back, they don't have to charge them federally. Like, they can still charge them locally under a state crime, because a lot of times, again, a death, right, a murder, if they're going to charge them with murder or some other type of manslaughter, whatever it is, they can charge. It's a lot, I shouldn't say easier, but they deal with that a lot more on the local level than the feds do, right? I mean, federal agencies aren't working a lot of murder cases, and so that happens a lot, and then they can use the MLAT by working with their federal partners.
So I have a question, because it seems like one area that we may be beneficial in is getting students into these different roles that they can be, whether that's an investigator, whether that's an analyst, whether that's getting some specific certification. I guess, what suggestions would you have for those mid-level companies where you say, I go to your company and try to help you solve this issue you're having? The larger companies are going to have their own blue teams, their own cybersecurity teams. But what would you suggest role-wise for those mid-level companies that may need some internal protection, somebody that you would, be able to work with better in an investigation?
So are you saying roles so for them to have internally, or are you talking about working with third parties, or?
Yeah, internally. So if they were looking to hire people, right, to get their business or their company better suited.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so it's a catch-22 kind of, because to bring somebody senior with a lot of experience, a lot of times they're priced out of the market, and so, or you can bring in somebody more junior with less experience, but who is, we call them a hard charging, right? They're trying to come in and want to do the right thing. They're willing to take on a lot on their own. But really, it comes down to you get somebody with the cyber background, whether it's in computer science or cybersecurity degree, or they criminal justice degree with digital forensics and incident response courses, and then they got to come in and really, you don't want to bring them in on their own, but you can bring them in and if you have a small team already, at that point you can really train them up and depending on your situation, right? Whether you have a 4-man team or you have a 10-man team in your organization, at that point you can have them, work potentially as like you're our SOC analyst, for lack of a better term. You don't have a SOC, but they're going to sit and they're going to monitor the alerts on your SIM, on your firewall, and then based on that, they're going to go through and review them, and based on what they see, they can elevate them and then work with somebody else on that elevated investigation, and that's really a good way to get them up to speed and get them trained on what they need to do, and then they can take on more skills and more responsibility as they learn that role. And with larger organizations, the same thing. Again, you can bring in a supervisor or somebody else that already has that background and training. And then they can help bring new people in and get them up to speed for training. But the biggest problem I see with all businesses really is this poaching, right? I mean, people, the cyber workforce is very mobile, and they're quickly to move and jump and go to other companies. And you'll see that when you meet somebody, they'll have in 5 years they got 8 different jobs, and I don't blame them for it, because they're getting great officers and they're getting better salaries or a better location, whatever the case may be, or they wanted to go work in a different area, right? But it's hard for these companies to maintain people, and then you got to start over and bring them in, but and train them up again to do the job. But unfortunately, I don't see that changing. So my recommendation is you need a few senior people that know what they're doing, and then you can bring in people with the basic skills and train them how you want them to do them, because each IT department's different, right? They're using different devices and security devices, and you want to train them on how you do it, based on what's worked for you, because everyone's different depending on the size of the shop. You got small towns have one IT person, right? So they set the computers up, and then they got to monitor the network, and they got to do everything, and so it's a big problem. We've had a good experience in Florida with the Florida Center for Cybersecurity. I know Tom mentioned that earlier when we were chatting offline. In that, they provide training and resources to all these municipalities, for example, as well as state agencies. But specifically, these municipalities, you got a 10 or 20,000 person municipality that has 100 employees. They have 1 or 2 IT people, and they're expected to not only set up the equipment and run the networks, but they got to watch for security alerts. And a lot of times these companies are now moving to third-party, software as a service like Microsoft 365, and relying on Microsoft to really monitor that as long as they set it up properly. But when something does happen, who do they call? And that's where these state agencies, if they have these relationships already, they can call them and they can send an IR team instead of paying a third-party company hundreds of thousands of dollars to come in and do the response. The state agencies can do those responses for municipalities. In a similar setup with private companies, right? They need to have those pre-existing third-party contracts and relationships where, okay, if this happens, we're going to call this person at this point and bring them in. And so you don't have to do it all yourself, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
So you've had a lot of experience in this space. I wonder if you can talk just a little bit. What would you want a company or a municipality or any smaller entity to know if they were to experience an incident? What's the best thing that they can do to prepare to work with law enforcement in an investigation? What should they kind of understand about the experience?
Yeah, so we're not going to come in uninvited, right? So if something happens, you got to call law enforcement and tell them what happened. And if it's if you're a small town, you call a local PD, they're not going to have a lot of resources to come in, but you should notify them, get that police report, and tell them, at that point, you want to try to bring in a state or federal agency if you can, because if it's an intrusion, right, or a ransomware, there's not a lot that a local police department is going to be able to do for you. Now, at that point, though, depending on it, the resources available and the workload of those federal agencies, it depends what they can do. So you want to, to answer your question, you want to do whatever you can first to protect your network, right? Protect your network, whether that's taking devices offline, whether it's killing the internet to your, if it's ransomware, killing the internet to your systems. But maintain that evidence. And the best way to do that, keep the system running, get it offline, whether it's, pulling the cable, turning off the router, whatever that may be. But that way, when you do call law enforcement and they come in, they can do a full analysis of that information. So law enforcement, they're not going to be that first responder. They're not coming in to protect your network. They're not coming in to fix your systems. They're coming to get evidence of the crime, right? And so you need to know that you have to have a plan to protect your systems and to restore your systems and get your network up and functioning again. And that's your number one priority is a cybersecurity professional there. The evidence, you want to protect it as best you can for law enforcement, but your job is not law enforcement. When you call them, they might not get there for another, 8 hours a day later, and they will want to get whatever evidence they can. But you need to know that they're not coming in. They're not the cavalry coming in to protect your network and fix it for you. They're coming in to gather evidence, and they may give you a card and say, this is a good company we've worked with in the past to help you fix your network. And so a lot of people don't understand that if they've never dealt with it. They're not coming in to save the day. They're coming in to gather evidence, and they're leaving. And they'll give you advice, and they might point you to some potential local companies they've worked with in the past if you don't already have relationships. But it's sad to go in and they have no relationships and they don't know who to call. And now they're trying to get their attorney and get a contract in place to have a third party come in to help them, mitigate the attack and then restore their system and their network, get them back up online. And that can take a while, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So that would be my biggest advice to them is your number one job is to protect that network. If you can, you want to maintain that evidence if you can, but if you can't, you can't. I mean, that's not your job. So hopefully you have stuff in place already that's going to do that. But if you don't, protect your network and protect your systems.
Absolutely, yeah. Are there trainings available I'm trying to phrase this correctly. Are there trainings available for companies or kind of these non-cyber people for cybersecurity to teach them how to build an incident response plan, to teach them how to build up an IT team? Like, do those exist in the world?
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned a few earlier, right? You got a lot of corporate, use SANS, like Tom mentioned, right? They have courses like that. The DHS and CISA have courses. There's a lot out there, and a lot of it really the best thing I recommend is dependent on your, you may have heard of the DHS, right? The Homeland Security critical infrastructure sectors, right? So if you work in banking, if you work in manufacturing, get involved with your local state agency. It's not an agency, but state working group based on your critical infrastructure sector, and they're going to have all that information to help you with trainings, with resources, with agencies, and with third parties you can work with, and you're going to make a lot of relationships because you're not the only one dealing with this. So if let's say you work in a small manufacturing plant making ball bearings, well, there's hundreds of other ball bearing manufacturers in the country. They're all dealing with the same thing, right? And that ball bearing, they're part of, say, the Defense Industrial Base Working Group, and you go in there, well, the ball bearing manufacturers aren't the only ones dealing with the same actors, the same threat actors, the same vulnerabilities and exploits. The people making the tires for airplanes are dealing with the same thing. And by getting into these relationships and getting these working groups, you're going to learn all the different resources available, all the different training available that's kind of tailored to your sector based on what the federal government, whether it's Homeland Security or NSA, what they're seeing the attack vectors are for your industry sector. And then you can work with them to take the proper training that'll help you. A lot of it can't be generic because it's the same, it's a computer, right? No matter who's attacking it. But you'll get the cyber threat intelligence, you'll get IOCs, indicators of compromise, whether it's, here's a bunch of IP addresses that we've seen in previous attacks, you should block these on your firewall. Simple example. You'll get those from those sectors. They're called ISACs. I should have mentioned that earlier, and I don't remember what ISAC stands for.
I used to know this too.
Yeah. But look up your local ISAC. And if you go to DHS and type in ISAC, they'll come up, and you can find your local one. And every state pretty much has one. Sometimes some of them have some states have multiple because the state's so big, they'll have different ones in different cities. And then you can network with them. And when you'll get to know these people and you start experiencing something, you can call your counterpart at another corporate company. Hey, are you seeing this? Have you dealt with it in the past? And it makes great resources for you to reach out to and rely on. Just like we do in academia. Hey, you got to teach this course. You ever taught this one before? What did you have problems with? Same thing here with this ISAC and these relationships you make. So that's what I would recommend. The best way to find out specific training in your area that other people may have taken and can give you firsthand, reviews on it, if it was good or not. Because there's so much out there, it's hard really to pinpoint anything.
Something that I'm struck by as you talk about your experience and this arsenal that the federal level law enforcement have to respond to these incidents is that clearly it's been a priority for a while. I'm guessing because the federal government early on identified the threat to critical systems and infrastructure. And yet in 2025, we're still talking about our local police agencies and having to give these most basic, trainings on introductory cybercrime concepts. And I'm not saying that to be condescending, because I don't think it's a lack of wanting to know them. They point to structural issues. There's not enough funding for training. They don't get funding for equipment. And so what do you think the disconnect is between the federal level and the state less so, but more local levels in law enforcement capability?
Yeah. I think it really comes down to the priority cases, right? I mean, if I click on a spam phishing email and put my credit card in because I think I'm an Amazon, and they take my credit card and they order a bunch of stuff, and then I call my credit card company, it feels like a victimless crime, right? But if you call 911 because someone's stabbing you, I mean, where do you want the police to focus their efforts? It's really what it comes down to is a resource issue, and then, the size of the police departments. I mean, the majority of police departments in this country are small. I mean, outside of the 100 largest cities, right? Most of them are 10, 20 people. And you really, I mean, what is their, I think of my hometown, what is their job? It's patrolling the area and responding to 911 calls. And they really just don't have the resources to work on a lot of cybercrime issues. Now, where they do a good job, I will say, is, again, going back to, God forbid someone gets killed or getting stabbed, right? I was meeting with a local police department here. I gave them some old equipment I had. Again, I gave them some old forensic equipment to help them, right? And they said in one murder investigation, it's typically 20 phones. But they gotta take 20 different phones and analyze them all, because the victim or the suspect, whichever phone you get, right, all those connections, and you're going through, you start identifying all these other people they're talking to. Well, what was their involvement? Were they there? Were they a witness? Do they have pictures of something? And so you have 20 phones per violent crime potentially. And if you're in a bigger, let's say a medium city, that's hundreds of, maybe, 1,000 violent crimes a year, and you're talking 20 phones per. At what point, it's just the resources are it's overwhelming to these departments, and so a lot of times if they, you catch the person standing over the body with a knife in his hand, okay, we really don't need to analyze a phone, we got him, and you move on, and you rely, and then these detectives, who could do these cybercrime cases per se, are tied up doing the forensics because they're all dual-hatted. I mean, most departments don't have an intrusion. It's not like the feds, right? Because the feds aren't doing first response. They're not doing instant response. They're criminal investigators, right? And so a lead comes in, they could work on that for 6 months before they can interview anybody, right? And so it's not that the priority's not there, but it's a different investigation because there's no immediate threat to life. You're trying to just, the crime's already happened, and you're just trying to put the pieces together in the federal government and build a bigger case and get these people indicted, where in the local ones, a lot of times it's life or death, and there's a moment's notice, and you didn't catch the person, now you got someone going out and committing violent crimes. You got to get these phones, you got to go through them real fast, and you're just trying to catch the person, and they just don't have the resources for these cyber crimes, unfortunately. I think that's just the reality of it, and it's not that they don't want to do it, it's just they don't have enough resources or people to do it.
And something that I didn't expect that was identified as a challenge in one of the surveys we did was paying for data storage. And that hadn't occurred to me before we did that, but we think about, like you said, 20 phones, apps are getting bigger, data is taking up more space, and they have to be able to store that, hermetically for evidence purposes, and they're like, we don't have the money to pay for a cloud service. What do we do with it? And
a lot of it, right? If it's evidence, you can't even store in the cloud, right? You gotta have your gold copy, which is your original, right, or your original copy. Then you gotta have a secondary copy just in case that one goes bad, and then your third one is the one you actually do your analysis on. So for every terabyte you seize, potentially you need 3 terabytes of storage, and that just is. You got to, depending on the state, some of the stuff you got to keep for 30 years. I mean, a murder case could appeal for 20 years. You got to keep that stuff for 20 years. And you got to be able to analyze it again, so you can't get rid of the software, right? So it's just a snowball effect. And as these, as you said, as the data gets larger and larger, you're just getting more and more and more and more, where your evidence room is just full of hard drives. And the computers, right? You got to keep the devices. You can't get rid of the devices. You got to keep the phones. You got to keep the computers. And so they're stacked up in the evidence room with 3 copies of the hard drives. It's a lot, and it's a lot of money. And again, then the competing resources, do you buy new patrol cars and new bulletproof vests, or you buy more hard drives? And so it's a sad reality, but it comes down to funding. It really does.
I think, too, on that conversation, I think about internal cybersecurity, right? You can get cloud service, that's great, but if it's, I won't drop any names because I don't know security standards, but like, let's say it's insecure, right? And somebody can get into that. Now all your evidence is at risk. And so maybe you have to buy better products to meet that security standard. Well, those are resources.
More expensive. Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you see as the biggest issues moving forward? Like, say, next 5 years, what do you think are the most concerning issues, whether it's for law enforcement or the average person? What are you most concerned by?
Well, I mentioned it earlier, it's kind of twofold, right? So it's already happening, right? It's big business now. It's organized crime in nation states is who are doing the majority of these cyber crimes, right? It's not some kid, trying to steal a couple credit cards. I'm sure that happens, but and the problem is, how do you defend yourself against that? And then you throw in AI, right? Where in the past, for example, take it was a West African credit card gang, right? That's sending thousands of, you remember the old 417 letters and the terrible spam emails you got, right? Well, now they're using AI to tailor these messages. But what they can do even more is they can take AI and they can, they'll go find a dump on the dark web of, so MyFitnessPal was hacked, right? And you get your email, I don't care, it's MyFitnessPal. I don't use it no more, I'm not changing my password. Well, if they have that password, and you reuse that password, right, they can go through that in AI quickly. And they can also identify other places you use your email based on different dumps that are out there on the internet. And then they can target you that way, right? In AI, in the past, they couldn't do it because you couldn't sift through 5 million records and pull out individual passwords and try. Well, AI does it in, 20 seconds. And they can build those patterns, and then they can tailor it and focus on people. And it's not that they're focusing on you individually. It's just your information was in that dump, and then they're coming after you. And it has nothing to do with where you work. Has nothing to do with where you live. It's these corporations, for lack of a better, they're getting hacked, and this information is getting dumped, and people are reusing their passwords, which you should never do. It's hard. It's hard. I'm guilty of it. I've reused my password, right? And then you get notified. Like I said, MyFitnessPal. I was a member. I got hacked. I'm like, I got to change all my passwords now because of MyFitnessPal. And again, people are going to reuse passwords. I get that, but to counter, the best you can do as an individual to counter these threats is install, use multi-factor authentication, and whether that's through a text message on your phone or an authenticator app, whether, the two big ones are Microsoft and Google. Just do it because they're so good now. You do it one time and your browser's authenticated until you log out or you try to log in from a different device. You don't have to enter it again per se, unless you're using super high security. That stops 90%. Probably 99% of these attacks, right? So even if they get your password, they can't get in because they're coming from a different device. You'll get a text going, someone tried to log in. No, it's not me. So someone's trying to get in your account. You might want to change your password because they got past the first step. So that's the first thing. And then, the other thing is, the information that's being shared online, I think of LinkedIn, right? And so this is where you get into the nation states with these advanced persistent threats. You've probably all heard of the APT threats, right? Well, if if you work for let's just say a defense manufacturer, and you have a nation state that's trying to get into that defense manufacturer to steal some, military tech data or weapons plans, and you're on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I was at this conference. It's great to see everybody." Well, they're on there. Mm-hmm. They can grab that information, use AI to craft a message to you and try to spearfish you, or they see who went to this conference. They grab all their names, and they got a huge database of dumps. They run through that database, again, AI, looking for your name. They identify you were in MyFitnessPal again. You reuse that password at your aerospace company. Now they're coming in on a remote desktop trying to hack into that company with your credentials. It's easy to find your email address for a company. If you reuse that password, they're coming in, right? And you got to, your cybersecurity people got to defend against that. But if you're, again, if you don't need remote desktop, turn it off. You'll hear the terms living off the land binaries is the big thing threat actors are doing now. What that means is pre-installed software on, say, Windows, right? So you have remote desktop, you have PS Exec, you have PowerShell. So all those softwares pre-installed on a computer. It's made for admins to use. Well, the criminals can use those too. And if they can reuse your password and you don't have two-factor authentication turned on, So again, these small to medium companies, that's 99% of the attacks are stopped if you do that stuff. You just got to do it. Is it a pain sometimes? Sure. You go pick up a new laptop. You got to log back in. You got to get your text. You got to do this. That's just the world we live in now, and you got to, for lack of my old military, suck it up and make it happen, and it'll stop 99% of the attacks, I would say. And that's really the big thing I see is credential reuse and the ability of AI for these organized companies and nation states to use AI to go through that data so quickly and spit out new attacks. And it's a numbers game for them. You got 10,000 employees, they only got to get one, right? And so make it mandatory. All your employees should be using multi-factor authentication. Turn off those administrative tools on computers if you don't need them. If you do need them, reserve them for specific administrative people who really need them, and internally only. It's my recommendation. And again, that CISA training I mentioned, they go over all that and they show you how to do it and they show you how it happens and you got to respond to it. It's wonderful training. If anybody's interested in learning that, I would highly recommend it.
And I know this all sounds very abstract and business oriented, but there was recently an arrest here in Michigan of a guy who utilized breached data to get people's passwords in order to log into their Instagram account or their iTunes account or any other kind of cloud storage just to get nudes. So it can affect the individual, and we don't assume people are going to go to this length, but they can. And so it is important to keep all the things you're saying in mind, no matter whether you're talking about a corporate environment or your own security, because once that data is out there, it's out there. And so it is easy to, it's time consuming, but somebody who has time will take that time.
And AI makes it so much faster too. I mean, this it's not just businesses. These multi-factor authentication. If you're just a home user and you happen to catch this podcast, turn it on every account you have. There's no reason not to. It's so simple now. And again, you don't do it every time you log in. The first time you log in on your home computer, it'll pop up, it'll refer, and then you're pretty much good on that browser for 60, 90 days, and then it'll ask you again, right? It's not a pain like it was when it first came out and you had to do it every single time you logged in. So keep that in mind and put that and change your passwords. If you get a text saying, hey, here's your text from your bank, and you didn't just try to log into your bank, somebody's got your password because they made it to the second step. Change your password.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just another example of how, the internet has exploded, the things we use it for has exploded, and it's made it so hard to stay safe. Because when you have 60 accounts, right, coming up with a different password for everyone is terrible. I get it.
Terrible. And when it's not related to
and if you use a password manager, it's only one. If they get that one, they got them all. It's a double-edged sword, right? Really so is. What do you do? Yeah.
So you obviously have very unique perspective on intrusion and how it takes both technical and social skills. Do you think we're going to see AI-based intrusion products where now you don't necessarily need to be the one to have those skills, but you can use them, like we're seeing with ransomware?
I think to a point. I think AI can write code, right? And it's for example, right, and it can look through code and look for exploits, and there's an error here, and so, and you don't have to have any skill to do that. So I do think at some point we're going to see that type of activity. I mean, we're already seeing it a little bit, right, where they'll download code if they can get code from a server, they'll download, look for an exploit in it, and then have AI write an exploit to get in there. But as far as it manually doing everything itself, we're not there yet, but I could see it happening. I mean, it would have to be, some custom AI that, could be written. But again, these are nation states we're talking about, and they can do it. I mean, they have their own AI, and they can, write new AI based on what they want it to do, and you throw in the machine learning, and you throw in the back end information with the information they have readily available. It's coming. We're not there yet, but I think it will be there. Where it's point and click, kind of like the old Metasploit, right? You would put an IP address and point and click. Well, you start putting AI in with Metasploit and putting them all together. The tools are coming, and they're going to get there, and they're just getting better and better and better. But again, though, I mean, if you're doing these simple things, it's stopping a lot of it. But if you're the target of an APT attack, right, for whatever reason, if they say, Tom Hyslip, I need to hack you, and it's a nation state. It's just I'm getting hacked at some point, right? I cannot defend against a nation state myself, and so and that comes down to what do you put available out there? What data is online or is available for them to steal, to hack, what accounts, and. Again, the biggest thing you can do personally to protect yourself, other than what credit freeze, right? Everyone should have a credit freeze. Freeze your credit. There's no reason. It's free. And then if they do get your information, you don't have to worry about identity theft and credit card fraud and in your name. Just freeze it. And then when it's so easy now online, and then when you go to get a new loan, you just unfreeze. It unfreezes. You apply for the loan, refreeze. You're done. And that helps you there. But yeah, it's just. Unfortunately, like you guys said, it's never ending. It's going to get worse, and and we just got to keep. It's a cat and mouse game. We got to keep responding.
So now that we're kind of wrapping up at the end here, one question that we're asking everybody is, if from all the conversations we've had, from all of your experience, all of your perceptions, if you could give one piece of advice, one takeaway for the average listener, what would you want that average listener to know?
Well, it's a cliche, right? It's not if you're going to get hacked, but when, and just know that you can protect yourself very well between those two things we mentioned earlier, right? Multi-factor authentication, change your passwords, and have a credit freeze. And then kind of your personal situation is good. Now, it's not going to stop something like Tom mentioned. If you have nude photos in OneDrive and they get in your OneDrive, your nude photos are gone. So, you just got to, if it's anywhere on the internet at some point, it's getting leaked. Just know that. But, protecting yourself, your personal finances, your family's income, right? That's the most important thing, right? I mean, if they delete all my photos off OneDrive, all right, it sucks, right? All my kids' photos are gone, but I can still put food on the table and I can pay the bills. But you should do those three things. Again, multi-factor authentication, whether it's through text or an authenticator app. Change your passwords. And you don't have to change them often. That's not the rule anymore, right? Just have different passwords on different accounts, right? You can have the same. NIST doesn't even recommend changing your passwords anymore. It's have a long password, right? And use multi-factor authentication. You can use that password for 10 years. Until it's leaked, then you change it, and then do a credit freeze, and you'll protect yourself and your family, and that's really the biggest, the most important thing to most people, individuals at home is, I don't want my identity stolen, I don't want to be told my daughter's social security number. she's straight. Like I told you guys about her earlier, which is insane to me. And you can pay the bills and keep living. You might lose a little bit of data, but life goes on, and that's the most important thing.
It's all great advice. And really hard to implement, but it is easy, unfortunately. I mean, some of this is just simply comfort. We don't think to change our passwords and do all of that, but it is the most basic thing you can do. So you're absolutely spot on. This was great. Honestly, I feel like we could keep talking for a really long time.
It's been fun. It went quick.
I know.
Definitely. So we would love to have you back on. This would be a lot of fun to keep talking. So,
all right.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Thanks, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you the next time we cross the firewall. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is crossing the firewall.